States is facing the greatest financial crisis since the Great Depression. The crisis has spread to global financial markets, and it's requiring coordinated action by both the U.S. and other countries. The government's response so far has been fairly extensive. Here today with us to discuss a new report entitled Strengthening Government's Ability to Deal with a Financial Crisis is Tom Stanton. Hi, Tom. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, could you explain a little bit about the evolution of this financial crisis and how did it come about?
The basic problem in the financial crisis was that people, firms, financial institutions, the country, were all borrowing beyond our means. And what that meant was that when we had a downturn in the economy, suddenly we didn't have money to pay for what we wanted. The crisis itself evolved. It started out in the mortgage market, and then when banks realized suddenly that they didn't know how bad their losses were going to be from mortgages they held, it turned to the financial sector. And the financial sector froze up. Banks didn't want to lend to other banks, didn't want to lend to anybody because they didn't know whether those people could repay the loans. After that, and the Fed intervened massively to deal with that problem and the Treasury, after that, we're now in the clutches of a fairly brutal recession. So the problem morphed from mortgages to the financial system and now to the economic system in a way that was very hard for policymakers to keep up with.
Could you tell us a little bit about what the U.S. government did in response to this?
Treasury and the Federal Reserve were a bit slow in recognizing what was happening, but about the time of the collapse of Bear Stearns, an investment bank in New York, they woke up, and then they reacted massively, and I think fairly well. In the beginning, it really was running around trying to put your finger in the dike, trying to deal with institutions that were failing, trying to prop them up, trying to deal with the fact that banks wouldn't lend to each other, so creating federal guarantees to allow institutions to lend to one another without worrying that the borrower would somehow go out of business on them. And they proceeded from there. And of course, most recently, as we morphed into the economic crisis, the Congress enacted a stimulus bill that will provide substantial resources to try to offset some of the direct impact of the recession.
Okay. And in your report, you made some recommendations. What were some of those key recommendations that you made?
First one is that legitimacy is essential. That we are supporting insolvent institutions. Taxpayers now own large pieces of Citigroup, AIG, Bank of America, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. And at the same time, millions of people, insolvent borrowers, are losing their homes. We have got to make sure that the government's response is consistently seen as legitimate. The second essential area involves public administration. Government has got to be sure that the agencies that are called upon to carry out the massive new programs we're talking about, in fact, can do it. In here, Exhibit A would be the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA. The Inspector General of Department of Housing and Urban Development points out that the people that were committing fraud in the subprime market are now flocking to become FHA lenders. FHA is running its main loan processing system on COBOL, and their book of business has trebled in the last year as the private sector has essentially retreated and government has had to step in to take up the slack. Somebody had better be taking care to assure the quality of systems at FHA and the quality of public administration. And that's true for a number of agencies that have responsibilities in responding to this financial debacle.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. You can read the full report on businessofgovernment.org.